The girl in the graveyard is your best friend, so you take her home. The night is a bruise between you, a blotch of rogue in the passenger window, the color of fruit left out to fester. The body pries at her seatbelt, a finger, then two. The radio echoes static, the body shuffles in her seat. You study the face, the similar slice of jaw. The nose humped from where a baseball had hit her at 12, just slightly off-center, in the skin like a rain-licked plastic bag, the stink of musk and sulfur. You want to look away, but you cannot. She's so beautiful, even like this. Your headlights rake warbled slits through the dirt road, a yellow like jaundice. Your hands are stiff from the cold, your lips cracked. The girl beside you is dead, and you are bringing her home. 4 days ago, you'd stepped into a hardware store and emerged with a shovel sturdy enough to lift a life on. 4 days you'd spent digging dirt in your own backyard until loam muddied under your fingernails and erratic holes split garden beds like the mouths of greedy beasts. Until you could sift through soil with your eyes closed, with a hand bound. 4 nights you had laid in your bed, staring at the pockmarked ceiling, wondering what it felt like to burn alive. Now the shovel beats dull against the skin of your trunk, your hands gripping the steering wheel like a throat you're trying to silence. The body turns, dawn bleaching the salmon gray of her skin. The left eye slips from its socket, and she pushes it back in with the heel of her hand. She smiles, head lolling like a marionette's. "Sorry, baby." Her voice comes out strained. "I wasn't expecting company. I'm sure you understand." In a sickle of citrus moonlight, Adeline Marcus smiles up at you with shell-pale gums. Adeline Marcus died on the 31st of October and was buried a week later, the date on her gravestone a month shy of her 18th birthday. In the court, the boys would claim it was an accident, that they didn't know she was inside. For better or worse, you believe them. The fingers striking out matchboxes, the beer cans constellating the sidewalk. A prank gone too far. The wrong place, the wrong time. It doesn't have to be on purpose. She didn't have to be home. The coroner ruled it suffocation, but all you can imagine is flame like a stiff palm, striking over and over. Adeline had crawled from the mouth of the home on her hands and knees. She was dead by the time she reached the pavement, her Sunday dress singed up to her knees. The dress you knew well enough. Either way, the boys were left with 25 to life and the Marcuses were left with a dead daughter, a ring of ash like chalk on the pavement. You were left with a misplaced guilt like hunger, a guilt like an Ouroboros, choking on the tail, swallowing the head, eating yourself alive and being unable to stop, even as it consumes you. Because this wasn't the sort of thing that happened to good people. You watch water curl down your shower drain, carrying with it mortuary makeup, kaleidoscopic insects and jasmine bubbles, strings of dirt stretched out like sinew. The body's head rests on her knees, vertebrae needling through her back like a line of molars. The electric lights wash her green dark veins rooted under brittle skin. She turns her face to the shower head and picks at the powdery sediment under her fingernails. The shower floor is a mess of grit, and you think of a child scooping up the sand. You turn the heat up until it scalds and scrub mildew from the base of the shower door. You think, if you can only get everything clean, everything will be all right. She turns her head and looks at you through eyes obscured by glass paneling. She says, "It's not as bad as all that. I don't even think I felt a thing. But she says it through lips the color of spoiled plums, so the sentiment doesn't ring true. You lift threadbare towels from the bottoms of your linen closet. You walk 3 times around your block and return to a corpse sat on your sofa like she has nowhere better to be. There are ants in your sugar bowl. You try to remove them, lift their crystal knotted bodies on the prong of a fork, but they slip between the gaps and you are left with a mess bigger than when you started. Tea brown sludge bleeding from thoraxes and the stink of vinegar. There's a dead girl on your sofa, but let's focus on the ants in your sugar bowl, the way they thread through cysts of white like veins on a leaf. Like the capillaries that run through the skin of your face. You make tea anyway. You add too much milk and sit cross-legged in front of the body. She stares at you. You stare back. The two of you drink, and ribbons of watery milk pour clean out her trachea, the gaping hole in her chest. But she doesn't stop drinking until you do. "You're not looking at me," she says. "Not really." "Yes, I am." You twist your hands in the shag carpet. "Aren't I now?" "No," she says. "You're not." You leave your teacup on the floor, saucer, an iris of yellow, and go upstairs. You take 2 cigarettes from the carton squashed on your father's desk, and then think better of it. Press down with your heel until tobacco dissipates into the tawny carpet. You change your bedsheets twice, eggshell white. No, gray with peonies. You make a second cup of tea. When you get back to the room, the body is still there. You are looking at her. You are not looking at her. "Do I disgust you?" she says. "No." She shakes her head, dark hair plastered to her shoulders like reeds. "No more than I always did." "You need to sleep," you say. "Baby." She tilts her head to one side. "Sleeping is all I've ever done." The last time you saw Adeline Marcus alive was in the back of a stranger's car, parked on a stranger's street, with the taste of a stranger's tequila fresh between your lips. You were never too built for parties, so the outcome was a pair of girls who looked like they were playing dress-up. Blousy dresses with sleeves like a nun's, thrift store necklaces noosing your necks, shoplifted lipstick which she hid beneath her mattress, more wax than pigment, but in the citrus peel of streetlights, in the low trill of distant music. The two of you looked beautiful. She had her legs curled under her and was sitting sideways in the back seat, her hand resting on your knee and the other palmed against the window, a song on her lips that you couldn't quite place. You were too close. But it was night, and everyone was inside and drunk, and sometimes we all need to feel closer than we should be, to lose ourselves a little. The song melted on her lips, swallowed into the limp press of salvia and booze, and Hugh said something like, "I think I should go home now." And she said something like, "Have another drink," and so you did. You let her pour the liquor into the flimsy mouths of red plastic cups and watched her swallow. She said, "You're so pretty," and you said, "I think you should." And she said, "Just let me say that one thing." And you wanted to say, "Stop fucking looking at me like that." And you wanted to say, "I want to crawl inside you and make a life for myself in the city of your mind." And you wanted to say, "Let's just be quiet. Let's just not talk. Let's just not ruin a good thing by telling the truth. Blah, 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 blah." Instead, you pushed open the passenger door, stumbled out onto the skin of vein blue sidewalk, and going home now. The body lays with her back to her bed, hands worming in the floral sheets, chestnut hair spilling across her throat, past the ballpoint pen-marred bedposts, over the gray skin of her forehead. You are thinking about the silken mouth of a coffin. You are thinking of how she looked when you pulled her from the rose mouth of heaven. The radiator hums. A lace curtain bellies your open window. She rolls over onto her side, slots her hands together like pieces of a decaying jigsaw puzzle. You still can't even look at me. Her mouth moves too slowly, words like chewing gum. Why am I here, Bet? What's it for? There are pink crescent moons on the bed of your palms from the bite of your nails. She pulls her knees to her chest and a bone cracks. She pulls her knees to her chest and a molar tumbles from between her keyhole lips. You can only love me when I'm not here. You can only love me when there's nothing left to love. You press your cheek to the cool spread of linen beside her. You listen to the steady beat of your heart, the way you can feel it in your fingertips, entirely singular. Don't tell anyone, you say. Did you want it to die with me, Bet? She shifts and her hair falls against the nape of your neck. Were you glad it was silenced? Don't tell anyone, you say again. She sighs, lays herself back down so you're face to face. Crooked nose, eye pulling from its socket, the onset of gray-green decay wreathing her jaw, the smell of soil and rot and cicada-heavy nighttime. Oblique replies, his voice fragile with concern. Who could I tell? She brushes your hand. I'm not really here. And suddenly you can imagine it is your fists splitting beer cans in two like overripe fruit. It is your fingers on the matchbox, your fingers striking out. But you both know the house would still be on fire. And you both know you'd leave alone. You take her hand, you put your face in the crook of her neck and beg forgiveness from a ghost. My sister has always had a soft heart. Soft as sweetbread. He cried after the old woman, despite everything, maybe because of everything. I remember holding her as she wept, both of us covered in soot, her fingers scalded from holding shut the oven door. The Lord bless you, my lady, Malasika sighed. After the tears, she was quiet. She trailed me through the awful house with its sweetbread walls and sugared windows. I found the clothes we'd arrived in, offered up her kirtle, and she donned it without a word. She showed no whisper of response when we found the treasure in the attic, only nodded vaguely when I asked her to help me fill up the few bags we could easily carry back through the woods. Maybe it would be enough. Enough to keep us safe from our stepmother's whims. You did not want to go back there. It was the first she'd spoken in hours. I hesitated outside the witch's cottage, looking back over my shoulder at her. I do not want to go back to them. I sighed. Nor do I, but where else can we go? She wrung her fingers together in front of her skirt, eyes downcast, and her teeth digging into her lower lip. Eventually, though, she nodded. Fine. You are right. She looked back at the house. Wait 1 minute. There may be something left in the kitchen. The kitchen? I repeated in horror, but she only nodded. Yes. She did not think I paid attention, but I did. I know which of her potions might be useful. If nothing else, we can sell them when we get back. Belia chuckled despite the mention of her father's passing. I nodded slowly and followed her back into the cottage, though I stopped in the open arch that led into the kitchen itself. She moved easily, though the space reminding me painfully of just how long she had been under the witch's thumb, while the horrid crone tried to fatten me like a prize hog. She collected some dozen bottles and vials, tucking them carefully in between the bolts of silks and satins we had pilfered from the attic before returning to me. Let us go, said the doctor. Though there was no trail this time, she seemed to know her way through the trees. I asked how, once, when we paused to wait out the dark, but all she said was that she simply knew now, as though the forest spoke to her in a way it hadn't before. I felt the first thrill of fear at that, but I knew that she was still so scared herself. I refused to let her see it. I tried to coax her into dreaming about what sort of life we might have with the witch's pilfered treasure, and managed to earn a wan smile for my efforts. But it was cold and dark, and soon enough we simply huddled together under a gnarled tree as we waited for the deepest part of night to pass. When grayish dawn light began to filter through the leaves, she was the first to stand. She had gone quiet again, and only answered me with faint hums or single words as we continued on our way. She seemed more comfortable to be leading us now, but something in the set of her shoulders reminded me of something I could not quite name. Eventually, I lapsed into her silence. Will she move when she does? When the trees broke apart to reveal the familiar shape of our father's home, she froze. Then she broke into a run, and I was only half a step behind her. The door was already opening when we reached the stoop, and our father met us with his arms open and tears in his eyes. He held us close and apologized over and over, praising the Lord's name. I embraced him in turn, but alongside the relief in my chest, there was an anger in my gut. It had started a spark, but over the length of our trek back through the woods had grown into a steady flame. Billy's father's death had been the last solution I was looking for. I met my sister's eyes over our father's shoulder, and a chill ran through me. If my anger was a flame, then hers was the dead cold of darkest winter. Our father explained that our stepmother had been stricken ill not long after we left. She was in her room now, asleep, and had been for days. He did not expect her to recover, though he had been following the physician's orders as best he could. Perhaps she shall rally to see you, he offered us hopefully. When neither of us answered, he sighed and dragged a hand down his thick beard. There was more gray in it than I remembered. I know you must be angry with me. With us, he told us wretchedly. That I could lose track of you so easily. It is an unforgivable failing in a father. No. I started slightly at the sharp edge in my sister's voice. Her father did too. She had always had a soft voice to match her heart. We were lost? She repeated, staring at him intently. Her father stared back, eyes wide with a hint of fear. Lost, he confirmed, at last, in little more than a whisper. I dropped my eyes, unable to continue looking at him. My sister did not. Abruptly, she stood from our small table. We will go see her then. Look. I blinked, startled both by the sudden movement and the conviction in her voice. But I followed her into our stepmother's sick room. That flame of rage flickered a little higher in my chest, and I found that I could not make myself move more than 2 steps inside the door. My sister knelt beside the hateful woman and smoothed a hand over her brow in a gesture so tender it made me want to break something. Here, she tipped one of the witch's vials against her lips. This will help. I almost reached out to stop her, but as though she sensed the movement, she held a staying hand back toward me. I asked abruptly, turning back toward her. When the vial was empty, she stood and brushed her hands down the front of her skirt. She did not look at me as she left the room. I hesitated a moment longer behind her, staring at the woman who had left us to the wood in the wild. Already her breathing seemed easier. Anger and love for my sister warred, twin flames in the center of my chest. She shook her head and eyed my finger, ringing it up. She had always borne such a soft heart. Our stepmother was awake and lively within a day. Though shocked by our return, she was mollified enough by the offerings of treasure we had stolen away with that she simpered and even summoned up some mawkish tears, through which to tell us she was so sorry we had been lost to the wood. My rage burned hotter, and my sister grew colder. "We should celebrate your return," our stepmother exclaimed, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, but no other sign of her illness remaining. "What do you wish for supper, my darlings?" "Sweet bread." I jerked around to stare at my sister, eyes wide and mouth agape. She did not so much as glance at me, but I felt her hand take mine under the table. She smiled at our stepmother, and my throat went dry. "But you are still recovering, stepmother." "I feel quite well, all things considered." "I shall make it," she offered gently. I could have stopped her then, could have clutched her hand in mine and dragged us out. We could have taken the treasure and left. It had been foolish of me to think there was nowhere for us to go. We might go anywhere. Seeing our father again, hearing him refuse to admit what they had done, made me sure of that. But my sister looked at me, just for a moment, and the ice in her gaze froze me to my chair. She was not looking for permission, but I nodded shakily anyway. Our stepmother exclaimed what a good, kind girl she was as she moved into the kitchen. Soon enough, the cloying smell of the baking sweetbread hung thick in the air. It was all I could do not to gag. It was only 1 minute since she strolled into the kitchen. My sister served the plates while the bread was still steaming gently, even drizzling the last of our honey stores over our parents' portions. "We can always get more at the market now," she said with a hollow little laugh. Our stepmother agreed happily, though our father hesitated a moment before doing so himself. He was watching my sister with a faint wariness as she took her seat beside me. "Go on then, let us eat." They did. We sat in silence. It took our stepmother first. A faint cough, a furrow in her brow. She looked up with confusion, which changed quickly to a horrified realization as she stared at my sister. "You?" Our father choked, red spattering his lips. I looked away, squeezing my sister's hand tight where she had once more taken it beneath the table. "We were desperate," he strangled out, reaching for her pleadingly. "I did not want to. She made me." "See?" My sister shook her head. "You let her." He collapsed forward onto the table, his breath a wheezing rattle that grew fainter with each passing moment. Our stepmother tried to lunge for us, but her legs gave out and she sprawled across the floor. A scarlet trail, like candied jam, trickled from the corner of her mouth. "You," she gasped again, glaring balefully up at my sister. "You, little witch, find your family." They both began to convulse. I buried my face in my sister's shoulder. I could feel her stroking my hair. Even without raising my head, I knew she did not look away until their last breaths had faded into silence. Then she simply stood, her hand still in mine. We were both silent as we gathered up our bags, still unpacked by the front door, and stepped out into the cool evening. "You are afraid?" "You are afraid," I swallowed. Yes." She smiled at me, squeezed my hand again, and all I felt was cold. "You do not need to be. I will protect you." My sister has always had a soft heart, soft as poisoned sweetbread. The nights are the hardest. By day, sunlight streams through the narrow gaps between thatched rooftops, casting golden pools on the uneven cobblestones of the village. The boys dart across the streets, their bare feet slapping against the stones with careless abandon. Their laughter swirls in the air, a melody that dances on the wind, brushing past me but never quite settling in my hollow chest. They are so alive, their movements fluid and unrestrained, as if their very existence is music. Limbs like pliant willow branches, bending but never breaking. Their tiny hands clasp each other tightly as they leap from stone to stone, their voices a symphony of joy, their tears a sharp crescendo of sorrow. When they fall, their knees scrape against the coarse cobbles, and bright crimson beads well up, rolling like tiny rubies down their skin. The sight pierces me, not with pain, but with envy. Their blood is a proclamation, proof of something I can never claim. They only watch. The curve of my wooden lips remains frozen, carved into an expression of eternal cheer. Under the painted smile lies silence. No heartbeat thuds within my chest, no sharp intake of breath catches in my throat. Though finely crafted, my limbs lack the soft weight of muscle and the pulsing warmth of life. The ache of emptiness digs deeper and heavier when I see what it means to truly feel and know I cannot. When evening falls, the flickering glow of the workshop's hearth casts long, trembling shadows on the walls. Pichetto's hands, rough as sanded bark, envelop my wooden fingers. His calluses snag against the smooth, lacquered surface as he grips me with a tenderness that nearly breaks me. "You're my boy," he says, his voice roughened by years of labor and softened by a love I cannot echo. I nod, moving my head in the mechanical way he taught me. I attempt to meet his gaze, trying to absorb the warmth in his eyes and carry it with me. But my hollowness engulfs it entirely. I pretend his words are enough. I pretend I believe him. But when the fire's embers fade to a dull orange glow and Geppetto's breathing settles into the slow rhythm of sleep, the silence presses down like a weight. I slip from my corner of the workshop, my wooden joints creaking softly in the stillness. The window is cool beneath my palms, the glass smooth and unyielding as I press my forehead to it. Outside, the world stretches out under the velvet canopy of the night, a scattering of stars winking down at the earth below. I kneel, my joints bending awkwardly, and the motion is unnatural. My breathless voice escapes, barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of every unspoken hope. Please. The single word trembles, a raw plea splintering with desperation. My painted smile falters as I glance upward, fixing my gaze on the brightest star, its light sharp and unyielding in the darkness. "Make me real," I whisper, the words rasping like sandpaper over the edges of my hollow existence. Later, he looked down, startled, but caught his breath with a gasp. "Did you?" He looked back at me, pressing on with his story. The night momentarily pauses. My voice seemed to hang there, suspiring, fragile, and fleeting. Then it dissolved, swallowed by the stillness, disappearing like never before. And yet I remain kneeling, my wooden fingers curling into fists against the cold floor, waiting for a reply I know will never come. The scent comes first. It is subtle but insistent, seeping through the tiny cracks in the workshop's old, warped walls. Damp earth, rich and cloying, mingles with a faint sweetness, like flowers rotting in stagnant water. It clings to the air, thick and invasive, curling its way into my thoughts. A whisper follows, so faint it's almost imagined. It brushes against the edge of my consciousness, deliberate and lingering, like a shadow with a voice. I hear you. The words send a chill skittering down my wooden spine. My gaze darts to the far corner of the room, where the dim light of the heart barely touches. The shadows there deepen, unnaturally, pooling together as though drawn by some unseen force. They writhe and twist, a living ink blot staining the air, their movements sickly, fluid. Something takes shape. No, someone. Her outline emerges, wavering and unsteady, but soon the room is filled with her presence, undeniable and suffocating. Her wings shimmer, their jagged edges catching the faintest traces of light like shattered glass, each fragment reflecting splintered rainbows across the walls. The colors dance, disjointed and unnatural, as though the light resists her. Her gown flows around her in heavy liquid folds, darker than midnight. It doesn't ripple or sway, it oozes, pooling at her feet before fading seamlessly into the shadows that birthed her. But it's her face that grips me, rooting me in place. Her features are too sharp, every edge exaggerated as though carved from bone instead of flesh. Her smile stretches impossibly wide, the corners of her mouth curving unnaturally, exposing teeth too white and too many. Her eyes are the worst, vast black voids that swallow the room's meager light. They seem endless, pulling everything toward their empty depths. "You called to me, little puppet," she says, her voice a lullaby of silk and splinters. The words slide under my wooden skin, burrowing like splinters that splinter repeatedly. I try to move, to step back, but my joints seize. My limbs feel stiff and frozen, as if her gaze has turned me into stone. Santise returns my gaze, reaching behind me. "I didn't mean—" "Oh, but you did," she interrupts, her voice slicing cleanly through mine. She steps forward, her movements gliding and precise, each deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. A wish whispered into the night is a thread I cannot resist. Her words knot themselves in my mind. I force myself to speak, though my voice cracks and splinters like dry wood. Who are you?" She tilted her head. The motion was eerily slow. Her glassy wings catch a faint glimmer of moonlight through the window. The light refracts, painting fractured lines across her face and distorting it further. "I am the Blue Fairy," she says with a smile that could split the sky, "and I have come to grant your wish." Her name tastes bitter as I form it in my thoughts. It feels wrong, like something jagged stuck in my throat. But before I can question it, she continues, her voice curling around the words like smoke. "You want to be real," she says, her tone a soft mockery, each word dipped in honey and poison. Oof. I nod, though it takes all my will to force the movement. My stiff joints creak audibly as I manage to whisper. "Yes, for Geppetto." At this, her smile widens impossibly, her teeth gleaming like tiny daggers. She circles me slowly, her wings whispering against the air, their faint hum like a distant, unearthly melody. "Such devotion," she murmurs, her pale hand brushing against my wooden chest. Her touch is ice, a shocking cold that doesn't fade but lingers, sinking into the grain of my carved surface. Such longing. She steps back, her gown trailing behind her like spilled ink, and with a graceful wave of her hand, something appears. A box. It's small, crafted of dark wood polished to a glassy sheen, but it writhes unnaturally. It is wrapped in threads that squirm and twist like living things. The threads twitch, curling toward the air as though tasting it. She carefully places it on the workbench, her fingers lingering as though reluctant to part with it. "This," she says, her voice dropping into something low and resonant, "is my gift to you. To become a real boy, you need a real heart." "Excuse me." Her words settle like lead in my hollow chest, heavy and unyielding. "A real heart?" I whisper, unsure if it's a question or an echo of my growing dread. "Yeah, think." Her gaze sharpens, her eyes glittering with a hunger that steals the air from the room. She steps closer, her smile curling higher as her voice drops to a murmur. "A heart filled with love. And who loves you more than Geppetto?" The words hover between us, dense and suffocating. I feel them pressing down on me, each syllable cutting more profoundly into the emptiness where a heart should be. "I don't understand," I say, yet the truth is relentlessly and coldly pushing its way to the surface. She laughs softly, the sound vibrating through the room like a shiver. Her hand rises to brush under my chin, her touch impossibly light but cold enough to sting. "Oh, but you will," she says, her smile splitting wider, exposing teeth that glint unnaturally in the dim light. The blue fairy hears the wishes that rise like smoke from the desperate, those whispered into the void when all hope has drained away. That is her nature, her curse. Once she was radiant, a light that pierced the darkest corners of despair. She moved like a breeze through humanity's dreams, tenderly granting their heart's desires, her wings shimmering like a morning sky after a storm. She was a guardian spirit of grace and kindness, who mended hearts and rekindled hope. But centuries are long, and humanity's longing is endless. Each wish she granted, each aching heart she answered, chipped away at her light. The purity of her purpose eroded under the ceaseless tide of yearning, the insatiable hunger for more. Wishes never stopped, never faded. They came in louder and more desperate waves, crashing against her until the weight was unbearable. The centuries ground her down to something unrecognizable. Her shimmering wings dulled, their edges darkened as though dipped in ink. The gentle radiance that once defined her dimmed, corrupted by the endless demands of the broken and the lost. What was once an act of kindness became a cruel necessity, a compulsion. She no longer granted wishes to heal, she granted them to survive. Her magic changed, twisted into something predatory. She learned to feed on the despair of those who called to her, drawing strength from their longing and anguish. The light that once sustained her had been replaced by shadow, and her purpose warped into a dark mockery of what it had been. Now she prowls the night threads, her essence attuned to the vibrations of despair. The air trembles when a soul breaks, when a voice whispers words of desperation into the quiet. That is her summons. She hears the wishes like a faint, fragile melody carried across the silence. They hum through the air like threads plucked taut, singing their sorrow. And when she hears them, she answers. That is how she finds me. My voice, so small and raw, rises from the workshop's quiet, carried into the vast darkness beyond. The words I spoke, barely more than a breath, are no longer mine. They hang in the air, trembling, before dissolving into the night. She feels them as I do, sharp, aching, jagged with yearning. The whisper cuts through the stillness, a thread of despair stretched taut, and I feel it pluck something unseen, reverberating into the depths of the world. And she comes. No crash, thunderclap, or gentle flutter of wings heralds her arrival. Instead, her presence seeps into the room like an invasive fog, damp and suffocating. The air grows colder and heavier, and the faintest scent of decay, of wet soil and withered flowers, creeps through the workshop. It is her nature to come where despair calls. It is her curse to feed on those who ache the most, and I, who whispered my wish to the stars, have become her next feast. The shadows ripple like black water, their edges jagged and alive, stretching across the dimly lit workshop toward Geppetto's sleeping form. They slither over the floor, creeping up the worn wood of his chair, curling like smoke around his chest. No, no, no. The word tears from me, raw and jagged. My body moves before I can think, throwing itself into their path. My joints groan under the strain, splinters flying as my arms scrape against the edges of the living darkness. The cold bites into my carved limbs, freezing and splintering the wood with every desperate swipe. "Take me instead," I scream, clawing at the shadowy tendrils that twist and coil with a serpentine grace. My fingers scrape uselessly through their cold, insubstantial form. The blue fairy tilts her head, her smile widening into something predatory. Her teeth gleam like shards of broken glass. Her wings flicker erratically, their once glassy shimmer dimming like the final, guttering light of a dying flame. "You have nothing to give me, little one," she purrs, her voice soft but razor sharp, cutting through my pleas. Christina sighs. The shadows tighten around Geppetto's chest, and his breathing falters. A thin, rattling wheeze fills the room as the air struggles to escape his lungs. I can hear it now. His heartbeat, faint, steady, but slow. The sound thuds in my ears, a fragile drumbeat that stumbles and falters with every passing second, fading towards silence. "Stop!" I cry again, my voice cracking as I claw harder, my fingers splintering at the tips. The cold has seeped into me, hollowing out my little strength. "Please, stop." The blue fairy watches me from the shadows, her expression of distant amusement, as if the scene before her is no more than a well-rehearsed play. Her void-like eyes glint with something dark and cruel, reflecting no light, only my desperation. "This is what you wished for," she says, her voice mocking sweetness, soft and syrupy. "This is what it costs to be real." A faint sound fills the room, rising with every heartbeat. I look down and see it. The box. The heart inside pulses, the glow from its dark veins illuminating the workshop with an unnatural light. Its beats are soft, rhythmic and steady, a terrible echo of Geppetto's faltering heart. The sound is unbearable, the two rhythms sinking, one growing stronger as the other weakens. My trembling fingers close around the box, and the warmth of it jolts through me, foreign and wrong. It pulses against my wooden hands, as if alive, as if breathing. I want to throw it away, to crush it, to scream, but I can't. Geppetto's breath catches a faint, shallow gasp, and then he exhales one last time. His chest sinks, motionless. The shadows retreat, their task complete, leaving the room deathly still. "No," I whisper, my voice barely audible and fractured with disbelief. My wooden knees hit the floor, and the box clutched against me like a curse. I sigh. The blue fairy steps closer, her wings trailing ghostly whispers behind her. Her gaze lingers on me, her smile sharp and triumphant. She extends her hand, and I accept it. "You want it to be real," she says softly, her tone laced with dark satisfaction. "And now you can be." When the light returns, the workshop feels pale and hollow, a weak imitation of what it once was. The dim glow of the moon spills through the cracked windows, illuminating the wreckage of what I've done. The box sits heavy in my lap, its polished surface glinting faintly in the cold light. My wooden fingers tremble as I clutch it, the heart inside beating with a rhythmic, unrelenting thud. Each pulse seems to vibrate through me, filling the silence with a sound that doesn't belong, a heartbeat that isn't mine. The warmth of the box seeps into my hands, but it feels wrong and unnatural. It isn't comforting warmth, it's cloying and oppressive, as if trying to seep into the hollow cavity of my chest where a heart should be, but there's nothing there to receive it. Dana. I lift my gaze, my joints creaking with emotion. Geppetto lies on the floor, his body still, his chest hollow. The moon's soft glow outlines the emptiness carved into him, a cruel echo of mine. His face, once full of life and warmth, is now pale and waxen, his features slack in a way I've never seen before. I reach out with trembling fingers and brush them against his hand. His skin is cold, unnaturally so, like the chill of stone left untouched for centuries. It doesn't respond to my touch or squeeze back or offer the warmth that had once been my anchor. The heart in the box beats louder, a steady rhythmic pounding that fills the room like a mocking drumbeat. Each thud serves as a cruel reminder of the price I paid. This sound reverberates through the workshop, suffocating in its persistence. My grip tightens on the box, and I want to scream to throw it away, to shatter it into pieces, and scatter its contents into the night. But I can't. My fingers won't obey, locked as if some invisible force keeps me tethered to this cursed object. The shadows on the wall stretch and waver, faintly echoing the shape of wings that are no longer there. Her laughter lingers in the air, light and musical, but twisted, like a lullaby sung in mockery. "Be careful what you wish for, little puppet," the blue fairy's voice whispers, her words curling through the silence, leaving a jagged wound in their wake. I glance toward the corner where she had stood moments ago, but the shadows are empty now. She is gone. The room returns to silence, except for the heart's unwavering, steady rhythm. It pounds on relentlessly, as if it knows it has won, as if it knows that nothing will ever be the same. And I am alone.